Hello and welcome to Ask an Author with Julia Kelly. I'm thrilled today because we have an incredibly talented guest with me today. Kate Quinn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Kate Quinn. I'm the author of The Alice Network, The Huntress, most recently The Rose Code, and a bunch of other books before that, which I might be able to remember if I didn't have a launch month brain, which is basically like a sieve.
Yeah, launch month brain is a very real thing, and not enough people know about it. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the Rose Code, which is the book that we're going to be talking about predominantly today. Although I'm sure if there are questions about the Alice Network or the Huntress, would be happy to take some of those as well.
The Rose Code tells the story of three very different women: a beautiful blue-blooded debutante, a tart-tongued London shopgirl, and a shy crossword-solving spinster, who are all recruited to the mysterious Bletchley Park, a secluded English country manor where the best and brightest minds in Britain work in direst secrecy, breaking Hitler's supposedly unbreakable military codes. Although when you start throwing words like unbreakable around, the fates laugh. Just ask the Titanic.
Absolutely. You've started off talking a little bit about these three women. I'd love to dive in a little bit more about who they are, and they're very different, at least when we first meet them. So perhaps describing a little bit about what brings them together.
Well, it's the beginning of the war. It's 1940, and it is a time when the code-breaking hub of intelligence that Bletchley Park is going to become is still very much in its early days. They're scrambling to recruit anybody they can who is trustworthy and who has skills that are useful to put bodies in chairs, to put brains into this problem of breaking the Axis military codes. And to do that, you really did have a remarkable, recruiting effort. The Prime Minister Winston Churchill actually remarked at one point to the head of Bletchley Park, I did tell you to recruit anyone you could, just to recruit anyone you could, but I didn't know you'd take me quite so literally. And so you really did have people, and a great many women recruited from all walks of life. And it was one of the things that fascinated me about Bletchley Park was that you could literally have a duke's daughter sitting elbow to elbow with a clerk from London who had nothing to do with the aristocracy at all, and they would be working on the same thing, and they would be treated exactly the same because they had the exact same job to do. And that kind of thing really did fascinate me, because I love the idea that the park was really became a place that was far more egalitarian than you might suspect in 1940s Britain. It was a place where if you could do the work, your voice was heard. And that really made me think right from the beginning, when I knew that I wanted to have multiple heroines, that I wanted these to be women who were literally not only from all walks of life, but all different family situations, education levels, monetary levels, society influence. And these are women who would never have even met in ordinary run of life. But because of the war, they are thrown together, and the result is an extraordinary friendship.
Yeah, it's fascinating reading this book and going through and understanding that each of these women. So we have, and I'm going to double check the pronunciation of her name here. Is it Osla?
Yes, Osla.
Osla. So Osla, Mab, and Beth, who, as you say, very different people. They're from very different backgrounds. One's a actual debutante, and as you said, a shop girl, and then a girl who's living at home. She's sort of the daughter, the last daughter in the family, and the one who her mother and father obviously are expecting to stay at home. And they're thrown together in this really extraordinary place. And it was fascinating to see that each of them really, I think, has, I don't want to call it a chip on her shoulder, but she has something to prove, I think, even if in Beth's case, maybe she doesn't understand that's maybe the path that's going to be set out for her. What is it that these women are all facing? Perhaps we can start with Asla first, who I have to say I actually have a very strong soft spot for. So
I did too. I loved writing her. Well, you'll notice in the description that I gave at the start, one thing that one reader actually called me on was said that these words you're using, like spinster and shop girl, are not very flattering. And it's like, yes, but that's deliberate. That is where each of these women starts. A spinster is not a flattering word at all, but that is all that Beth thinks that she is. That is all that she has been told that she is, even at 24. A shop girl is all that Mab has been told she can ever be. A debutante might seem like a nicer word, but Osla's chip on her shoulder is that she is gritting her teeth slightly and has been for a very long time about just being dismissed as a silly Deb. Oh, you silly girl. You're not good for much except for, wearing pretty clothes and, making your curtsy at court, now go away and find a rich husband. And she
Mhm.
wants to prove that she can do more. And Bletchley Park for her is actually the second or third attempt she has made to do that. When we first meet Osla, she has absolutely refused to stay in Montreal where her mother sent her to wait out the war in safety. And this is real life, I based her on the real Osla Benning, who was a Bletchley Park translator. She makes her way back to England through a purloined air ticket and a certain amount of charming of various powerful men who should not have been susceptible to batted lashes, but who were. She got back to England. She immediately got herself a job building airplanes at a Hawker Siddeley factory. She wanted to prove a Deb could get dirt under her nails. And
Mhm.
she did. But then the fact is that she also had this beautiful finishing school German from going to finishing school in Austria. So that came to someone's attention, and she was recruited to Bletchley Park and became a translator. And that's how, she starts to realize I can be more than a silly debutante, than just a Mayfair socialite. And that's really the start where she realizes how much more she can be.
Asa's charm really comes in handy several times in this book, and it's really fun to see it deployed effectively. Perhaps now we can talk a little bit about Mab, who, I love all these characters for different reasons, and I loved her fierceness, and she's got so much that she's trying to prove. When we first meet her, I believe she's reading books, or she's thinking about books that she's read on this list of books for a well-read lady to try to improve herself and kind of elevate her station. So what is it that attracts her to Bletchley Park, do you think?
Well, Mab is a very different case. She is born into a certain degree of poverty in the East End in London, and to a large, rather quarrelsome family. And she was taken out of school at 14 to start working. And it has really been dinned into her whole life that this is what your life is. You'll live in the East End, you'll work in a factory or in a shop, you'll get married, you'll have more children, just like your mother did. And she's like, no, that is not enough for me. And so she starts on this course of self-improvement where she's going to movies to try to figure out how to iron, the East End out of her vowels. She's going to, secretarial courses so she can get a better kind of job. She's, got a list of, 100 books for the well-read ladies. So she's reading her way through the classics because, a lady is well-read and she's a bookworm anyway. And she wants to do all this because, economically, she wants to move up the ladder. She wants security, and she wants a home. She wants education. She wants all these things that ladies have and girls like her do not. And she wants them not just for herself, but for her youngest sister who is coming up after her, whose name is Lucy. And she knows that Lucy, like her, will leave school at 14 and have nothing more to look forward to than working all her life, getting married young, having a lot of babies, and never leaving the East End unless she has someone looking out for her. So Mab is on the lookout for a gentleman for a husband. She's realistic. She does not think like a millionaire or a prince is going to come out of nowhere and,
Right.
scoop her off her feet. She's not a romantic. She's like, I can be a damn good wife to some gentleman out there, and he will make me a great home. I will make him a great wife, and I will do everything to make sure my sister has the life I never had. And so when she comes to Bletchley Park, where she's recruited because, she was top of her secretarial course and she's got, skills that are going to be needed, that she's looking around there and thinking, this place is jam-packed with Oxford and Cambridge graduates, and I am sure I can find a nice man here. And that's her goal when she goes in, although her goal is going to end up changing as the book progresses.
I really enjoyed how upfront she is about what she wants. She's really not ashamed about it, and she's not trying to be coy with the other women about what it is that she wants a husband. She wants the security that comes with that, and she sees that as the path to get that. So it was refreshing in a way, not having her sort of dither about what her motivation was in her sometimes, regrettably boring dating life.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, she's not out to rook anybody. She wants to give good value. She's a nurturer at heart. She's like, I will make a great wife, but I want a good man, and I want a man who's not going to be getting drunk in a pub every night and coming home and beating the wife and kids. And I want a man who doesn't believe in taking his children out of school at 14. And I want a man who's a gentleman and whose children will also grow up to be gentlemen and ladies. And it's not wrong to want that. And the fastest way a woman moves up the economic ladder and the social ladder in the 1940s is by marriage. So she's just aiming for, I would like to have a man who's been to university and who will treat me well and who will treat my sister well and agree to help her. And in exchange for that, I will do just about anything, because I think that's that, for my sister at least, as well as for myself, this is everything to me.
Yeah. And then we come to Beth, who I think is a very different character. Well, she's very different from both of these women, but in terms of her approach to life when we first meet her, I don't think marriage is even on the spectrum of possibility for her. Whether she wants it or not, it's clear that her life is pretty set when we first meet her. So perhaps you can introduce us a little bit more to Beth's situation when the book begins.
Beth is a little older than my other heroines. She's 24. She's already regarded as being on the shelf. She lives in, the local village near Bletchley Park. She has a very strict family with a father who's basically a non-entity in his own house. Older brothers and sisters who've already moved out, and a very, very, very emotionally domineering mother. And Beth has been told her whole life that you are not smart. Your head's always in the clouds. You're a dumb girl. Mother will take care of you, like stay home with us. You're just too silly to be out on your own. You're never going to make it. And there's not going to be anyone to take you off our hands, but that's all right. You'll be the daughter at home taking care of her parents forever. And she's more or less accepted that. She's had a lot of the backbone really pretty thoroughly systemically crunched out of her. And it doesn't really occur to her that there can be another kind of life. But then Bletchley Park opens up down the road, and these two other girls, Osla and Mab, come to billet in their house because local villagers billeted the Bletchley Park workers in spare rooms. And she is suddenly introduced to the idea that there can be another way of life, and there might actually be something that she's good at. And the thing is that Beth is very good at pattern recognition. She's one of those people who could do a crossword puzzle in ink in under 8 minutes, and doesn't even think twice about it. And when her billet mates realize that this is the kind of skill that she has, they decide, this girl needs a life in the worst way possible. So they get her an interview at Bletchley Park, and she finds out that pattern recognition is one of those things that can turn you into a star cryptanalyst and someone who can really have a magical way of looking at codes and being able to work their way into them. So that is how Beth begins to bloom. And the idea that is for her, the arc for her in this book, is that she didn't even realize that she was so ground down until she realized that there was another way of life, that there is something that she is very good at indeed, that she is not dumb. In fact, she is, very far from it. She's brilliant. And that there are people who may say they love her, but who in fact have been holding her down and battening on her. And so her arc here isn't just about, it's not about just winning the war or finding love or any of those things. It's about finally blossoming from the ultimate wallflower to a star in her own right, which is what she does over the course of the book.
Yeah, Beth really takes such a dramatic transformation, and it's wonderful to watch somebody kind of come into their own and realize what could potentially be possible for them. So I think people are in for a treat watching Beth develop. I don't know how much you want to get into the second timeline of this book, because I don't want to spoil things for people, but can we talk a little bit about what's happening after the war when you have a second timeline here?
Yes, absolutely. There are two time threads in this book. One is the war years, which begins at the very, very end of 1939, and is where you are meeting these three young women as they are going about their daily lives and then getting recruited to Bletchley Park, meeting each other, and going through the war years all the way up to D-Day. The other timeline is really where we open the book. It is about 2 weeks before the royal wedding of Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip. And in that countdown, we see two of our three heroines and who have received an encrypted letter in the mail. And that letter is from the third of the wartime trilogy. I'm very carefully not saying who is what, but that third person, one of those three women, has ended up in an insane asylum. And she has sent an encrypted letter in cipher to the other two through the mail, and she is begging for help. And she is not only begging for help, she is saying that something went very, very wrong in their Bletchley Park years, and there is a traitor who needs to be unmasked. And the other two, in the lead up to the royal wedding and in the lead up to what is going to eventually happen there, they need to realize, can they trust each other? Can they help their friend who is in the asylum? And for the reader, who is going to be also figuring this out, the reader will not know what happened to splinter this friendship, because these three women have not spoken to each other since D-Day at Bletchley Park. And so the reader will be wondering, I hope, is that not only how did one of them end up in an insane asylum and who is a traitor at Bletchley Park, but what happened to make these women, so who were once the closest of friends, fly apart in such absolute fury that they can't even speak to each other on the phone without snarling.
Yeah,
So
it's
that
pretty
is the second timeline.
it's pretty incredible watching, because you see the friendship develop over time, again with very, very different people, but women who are supporting each other and pulling out kind of the best in each other and all of that, and then to see that, to know that that fractures at some point and know that that fracturing is coming, makes for a particularly interesting dynamic in that second timeline. And again, I don't want to talk too much about it because we don't want to spoil too many things, because there are secrets that are revealed along the way. But I do think it's fascinating to watch kind of the fusing together of a group of friends and then the absolute destruction of that friendship, or what does that destruction potentially lead to in the future. So.
Well, it was one of those things I knew from the beginning in writing this book, that not only was it going to be a book about intelligence and, code breaking and so forth, but it was going to be a story about a broken friendship. And if I was going to pull these women together, from all walks of life to become these unlikely, tremendous friends, I knew that from the beginning there would be the understanding that this friendship is shattered. And one of the secondary questions in this book, it's not just, can we win the war? Can a traitor at Bletchley Park be unmasked? It's, can the friendship be saved or resurrected? And that is, I think, something that fascinated me, because female friendship is tricky, and it's one of those things that it gets reduced a lot of the time in media to women can't be friends without cat fighting, but real female friendship can be more complicated than that. And when you're also adding to the burdens of friendship the burdens of secrecy, the kind of stress and the code breaking work that these ladies did, and the oath of secrecy they all took, they find themselves in some really terrible situations between the rock and the hard place. What do you do when your duty is on one side and your friends are on the other? And that is the question that is going to, in the end, prove critical to, first, not only the breaking of the friendship, but the question of whether it can ever be resurrected.
So I'm so glad you've mentioned the secrecy behind Bletchley Park, because I think if people do have a working knowledge of Bletchley Park, likely it comes from The Imitation Game or other media that's come out since then. But really, it's been a relatively recent phenomenon, only the last few decades, that we really have an understanding of what happened at Bletchley Park, because people signed the Official Secrets Act and took it very, very, very seriously. They did not talk about their war work. And we think in my family that my grandfather signed the Official Secrets Act, but we don't know. He never talked about what he did during the war. So there were little snatches of family history and family lore that we sort of have, but unfortunately he's passed away, so we can't ask any of these things. So perhaps you can talk a bit about the secrecy around Bletchley Park, why that's significant, and then also why it brings these characters together in this unusually close relationship.
Well, Bletchley Park was, tremendously secretive, because for a very good reason, because in order for the code breaking operations to work, it meant that, the Germans could not have any idea that the Brits were reading their mail. And that meant that no one could know what Bletchley Park did, that it was even there. And so therefore, when you were recruited to work at BP, as they called it, they issued you in, and before you were even shown anything, you were shown a piece of paper and said, you sign this and you are not going to be able to tell anyone what you did here. That includes your parents, your friends, your children, your spouse, anyone. You cannot tell them. And that even extended to fellow people who worked at Bletchley Park. They even, they call it stovepiping now in modern intelligence parlance, but everything is compartmentalized where if you work in Hut 6, not only do you not know what they do in Hut 8, but you might not even know what other people in other rooms of Hut 6 are doing. You are supposed to keep your eyes front and center on your work only. Now that doesn't always work. I mean, anyone with a little bit of intelligence can probably look around Bletchley Park and say, yeah, I have a pretty good feeling I know what a lot of these other moving parts are doing. But you didn't know details, and you weren't even supposed to, talk about that stuff in the park with other people who worked there while you were, having breakfast at the canteen. So you had that level of secrecy, and then you had the fact that, this comes up for Beth. She is a very nosy mother who does not like being told, no, you can't know what I do for a living now. And that puts a lot of pressure on family dynamics. It puts a lot of pressure on especially the men, because a lot of the men at Bletchley Park were subjected to a lot of social shaming because they were vigorous young men in the prime of life, not in uniform. And they would be, harangued when they went out in public, sometimes even by their own families. And they could not even legally defend themselves, by saying, bugger off. I do actually very important war work. Thank you very much. So it's that level of, secrecy that really weighs on everyone. And then you also bring into play the fact that the personal aspect, when you have people who, have husbands, or women who have husbands or brothers, fiancés, husbands who are off at sea, you might be doing a little discreet trading, with some of the ladies who are, tracking the naval ships and saying like, hey, can you pass me anything that you hear about the RMS Whelp? It's supposedly sailing in the Baltic right now. And, because you want to know, is there any danger coming to that ship? And you might learn way ahead of the headlines. So these are all the factors that come into play. And the secrecy and paranoia of Bletchley Park workers was pretty legendary. I mean, nowadays we live in a 24-hour news cycle. We are all familiar with those people who update every single move they do on social media, complete with plot points on maps,
Right.
so the idea of being so secretive, that they just told thousands of people one of the biggest secrets of the entire war, and then just said, now just don't tell anybody. And everyone pretty much said, oh, okay, we won't. And then they didn't for decades and decades. So that's incredible to us now. But it really was very true. And it really did a number on a lot of folks. You had people who, possibly like your grandfather, who refused to tell even after the 70s when the news started to come out. And because in the 70s, the 30-year period had passed, and it was sort of seen as, all right, I think some of this can come out in the open now. But some people still refuse to talk about it. And you had some folks who, during the war, they would be so worried about disclosing classified information, they do things like refuse to go under general anesthesia at the dentist.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, they would insist on local anesthetic only because they were so paranoid about, what if I talk while I'm under anesthesia? And then they would put themselves through incredible pain rather than take that risk. So that level of secrecy, I mean, it brought about, paranoia, insomnia, nervous breakdowns, emotional strain, you name it, they had it. It was a stressful place to work, even if physically it was very safe. But on the other hand, it means that these three very different women, they bond in a way because they're all under the same yoke. And even if they can't always talk to each other about it, it's like they know what the stress is and they know what it's doing to each other, even in a way that, the friends and family and the romantic interests cannot know. And they know what it is to have to lie to people you love, because you have to, because it's your duty. And, it's one of those things too. I think it means especially much to the women because, there's such a stereotype that women can't keep their mouths shut, and I think they had an extra motivation to prove that wrong. Because, I remember there was a joke I found at some point. It's like, what are the three most effective means of communication? Telegraph, telephone, tell a woman. And, that's the kind of thing that really just makes a woman's teeth fuse if she's heard it a few times. And so they really have an extra motivation to prove that, no, they can keep their mouths shut, keep their oaths, keep their duty every bit as effectively as any of the men can.
You've talked a little bit about the incredible stress that these people were under and also the incredible intelligence of these people, men and women who were at Bletchley Park. But this book also balances that against the question of what happens when you push someone too far and what does that look like? What were you trying to explore there when it came to that tension?
Well, one of the difficulties with writing about code breakers, my previous books were about women spies and then about women bomber pilots. And those are a little bit more immediately dangerous. I mean,
Yes.
women spies in occupied zones are in danger of being, caught and shot at any moment. Bomber pilots can be shot down and captured at any moment. These are threats that are easy to understand. But the Bletchley Park ladies did not come under a lot of physical danger because the park was relatively secluded in the countryside. It was never targeted for bombing. It was pretty safe. So if I was going to try to impel some tension into the book, it was going to have to be in the mental and emotional fields rather than the physical for the most part. Because physically speaking, these ladies don't come into a lot of danger, unless they go into London and, encounter the Blitz, which they do in the course of this book. But so I really wanted to delve into the fact that just because this is a mental war of the intellect, it does not mean that there are not incredible strains that come with it. And there were nervous breakdowns, emotional crack-ups that happened among Bletchley Park codebreakers. The work could be incredibly stressful, incredibly hard, and you had to do it day in, day out. You had these rotating shifts where you might be working, 9 to 4 or 4 to midnight or midnight to 8. And, if you're working at 3 a.m., you're throwing your mind against, this impenetrable wall of code over and over. And, sometimes you might not be able to get a single break. You might spend your whole shift or shift after shift, week after week, month after month, in some cases, really making almost no progress at all. That's the kind of work that's tremendously wearing on not just the mind, but the soul. So I really did want to get into that and the fact that, some find that incredibly stressful. And then there are some, like Beth is one, who really finds that she's almost refreshed by it. She has the kind of brain that almost can't get enough of it. But it's no reflection badly on those who are, find it more stressful. Everybody's built a little bit differently. And so I wanted to get into, why it was that this kind of thing was stressful on the people involved, even if it wasn't in a physical way.
Yeah. We have a couple questions from readers, and I do want to make sure we have time for those, and I'll be sprinkling them through. So if you do have questions, please leave them in the comments. But before this, when we were talking about this book coming up and this interview coming up in the group, Kelly said, I could not put this book down because I got wrapped up in the characters, completely different women, each finding their strength in an unexpected place. Were you surprised where any of their stories took you while writing?
I was a little bit. I knew, generally speaking, where they were going to go, but they all surprised me in different ways. And some of them were based on real people, or they were fictionalized composites of real people. And so it was fun to see where those stories went. And I was trying to pack in as many of the stories as I could, as far as what kind of, because there's so many people who worked at Bletchley Park. It really was a matter of I had too many stories to tell.
Mm-hmm. It's a good problem to have, but still a problem.
It was. Carving it all down to a manageable size, and there are some who would say this book is still not a manageable size, and I agree with you. I'm sorry. I wish I could have carved it smaller, but believe me, it could have been 3 times as long, and there would still be so many thousands of stories to tell.
Well, I think this might be a great time to switch into talking about some of the research, because this is a feat of research. There is an incredible amount that has to go into this book, because not only are you creating the world of Bletchley Park, the world of the Blitz, the world of London, in the post-war era when you're still dealing with rationing and austerity, but you're also talking about some very technical aspects of these people's work. So you have code breaking and translation and machinery that was used. How did you start with this book? Where did the research take you first?
Oh, well, I am fortunate that there is so much that has been written about Bletchley Park. You would think not, since the secrecy, but ever since the 70s, when the first books started coming out, there have been so many more. And there have been a great many memoirs written about Bletchley Park. This was my time there. This is what I did. And those were tremendously helpful. And there have been a great many technical manuals and technical nonfiction books written about just the various aspects of the code breaking itself, Enigma code, the Enigma machines, what the decryption process looked like. So then there were, books about the Blitz, books about, what was life on the home front in England like, and, what were the laws at that point? What did life itself look like? What did the park look like? What were, the ways in which people relaxed after shift? And what was the social life of Bletchley Park like? There really was so much. And I honestly could have researched for years, and I pretty much did. I could have researched for twice that long and still found more fascinating information.
Yeah. One of the common questions, and it's come up a couple of times, is how much do you do before you start the book? And then how much do you carry over when it comes to research as you're writing? Do you have a typical process that you follow, or does it change book to book?
For this one, I must have done 5 or 6 months of just reading and research before I really even knew what my story was. Again, because there was so much. But typically speaking, I do some months at least of just reading and outlining and thinking, trying to absorb as much as I can and see what falls out into my story and what the idea of the story will be. And then I will continue to research as I go because, you do the broad research at the beginning. And then as you go, you start breaking it down to what are the specific things that you need for this chapter that's right in front of you. And then after that, by the time you're done, when you're going back and editing, that's when you're fact checking, you're finding the things like, where you put in brackets, find a historically accurate French perfume and put it in here. You're saying this is where there's the comment bubble that says, figure out what the ration law was on bacon in June 1942. This is the kind of thing where you're fact checking your mind out and you're always still paranoid that you're going to miss something.
Yeah, it's inevitable that somebody will message you and say, actually,
yes.
And you can decide whether they were right or whether you were right. So we talked a little bit about before we started up this conversation live to Facebook. You and I both have expressed that maybe we wouldn't be the most well suited to code breaking. Maybe our minds don't work quite like that. So what was it like trying to write for Beth and the characters in Beth's line of work, where maybe you don't have the same technical skill or knowledge, but you're trying to describe the feeling of code breaking, the feeling of kind of stretching your mind and lateral thinking, I think they call it, in a way that would make it relevant to somebody who doesn't think in this way?
Well, it's one of those things where I really was tearing my hair out because I would read these passages, that were written by some incredibly chipper British woman who was like an ex-code breaker and who would say something like, oh, no, really, it's terribly simple code breaking. You just look for the settable umquavelts. And then after that, you draw the bigram table and look for this. And then after that, once you have the initial pairing, and I'm sitting here going, I don't care how many times I read that passage, it is never going to make sense to me.
No.
So I was like, how do I describe this? And then, what I came down to was the fact that I didn't have to teach the reader how to do this. And that was kind of a lovely, thing for me, a realization for me, because I thought, there are plenty of books out there that will teach you how to break Enigma code. There are YouTube videos that will break it down. There are exercises you can find. But my job is not to teach you how to break Enigma. My job is to teach you how it felt to break Enigma. So I focused on what were the feelings that Beth would have had while she was, doing those code breaking exercises. Because I find in a book, there's a certain sort of target you can try to hit with very technical stuff where the reader, you as the reader, don't understand a thing about what's going on, but you're deeply respectful of the people in the book who clearly do.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, Beth knows what she's doing, so we don't need to know what Beth is doing. We need to know how she's feeling as she's doing it. And so that's what I focused on. And there was a lot of great stuff I found because, again, as I referenced earlier, people wrote memoirs. And there were some lovely things about, well, what did people feel when they were, breaking codes? How did that feel? And there was some lovely passages and some wonderful, things I found there, which gave me a lot of good clues about how to write those passages.
I think it's always exciting to see the respect on the page for the characters and for the work. And again, understanding that I don't think I have the mathematical or pattern recognition brain to have done anything like this work. And unfortunately, I also don't have the foreign language skills of somebody like Asla, who was able to be really valuable for those particular skills. But I'd like to think that maybe I might have some of Mab's tenacity in just sort of getting the job done and doing what's needed. I don't have the height though, so maybe that would be something to work on.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's a bit of a cliche to think that only people who were quirky, brilliant geniuses or, multilingual would work at Bletchley Park. There were plenty of worker bees too, who were, people frankly would have been like me. It's like, all right, I do not have much of a pattern recognition skill and I don't speak fluent German or Japanese, but I have attention to detail, and I am meticulous. And if you tell me to do something perfectly, I will get it done, even if it's just a matter of like, some sort of, worker bee stuff where you're just maintaining a machine, or you're, working on the, decryption sheets, which has a certain amount of like, sort of slot and file work that has to be done perfectly or else it doesn't work. It's like someone like me would have been useful. I don't think it would have been at a high level, but I could have done my job.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what Bletchley Park is about, right? It's the sum of a lot of different parts coming together and working effectively in order to read the German mail and crack the codes, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that I loved the most was at its peak at 1945, there were 8,988 people working at Bletchley Park. 6,757 of them were women. So that is, such an incredible team effort. It's in the end, it cannot come down to, that saying that is in so many trailers, one man.
Right,
It's not,
exactly.
it's never down to one man or even one woman. It's down to all 988 people who all have to put their works in, and they do, and they did. And as it was a tremendous effort, because it is estimated, at least by some historians, I wouldn't swear by it, but it's estimated by some that thanks to Bletchley Park, the war was shortened by as much as 2 years, and certainly by hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, well, first of all, Sharon, who's watching, says, "I love how much you included pictures and book discussion questions in the back of the novel." The pictures in particular, I think, are interesting because that gives such a context to things. So, can you tell a little bit about a few of the stories? And I know you said there were hundreds that you could have included, but a few of the stories that helped shape this book and some of the real life people that you drew inspiration from.
Well, I really wanted to, get its sense of Bletchley Park as a character in its own right. So one of the things I really liked was the the Bletchley Park social life. There were so many clubs that people had. There was a Highland dancing club. They did Highland dancing on the lawn in front of the mansion. There was a chess club. They had a number of chess champions who worked there. They had, a dramatic society. The Christmas reviews were apparently wonderful. And so therefore from that, I ended up creating a book club, literary society, because my code breakers all, especially at the beginning when they have so little in common, they're all bookworms. And as we know, bookworms can always talk to each other about books, even if
Without
they have
fail.
else in common. So they meet every month with a new book of the month, and they have fun with that. And I did too, because it was a way to show how these people who work very hard can also play very hard and really enjoy themselves. That was one thing, the whole idea of the Bletchley Park social life was something I really did want to get in there. I do have a number of real life figures who really did work at Bletchley, who I had fun including in the background. You will see Alan Turing, the great and famous Alan Turing is in the background. You have Dilly Knox, who was one of the great code breakers, a tremendous, absent-minded genius of a man, ex-classics scholar, who had a all-female team. He insisted on recruiting only women, and not because he wanted, pretty young things to hit on, because he said that women brought less ego into it than men and could just get on with the job at hand. And so he had this tremendous team of ladies who worked and, did incredible work. And one of them is the basis for Beth, at least one of the basis for Beth. And her name was Mavis Lever in real life. And she was, just a 19-year-old university student who was recruited and who was one of the great code breakers of Bletchley Park. And it was that team of 9 women, including her, who had a wonderful bit, which you will see in dramatized in the novel, although Beth takes starring role there rather than Mavis, which is where she decrypted a message that said, "Today is the day -3." And this was traffic from the Italian Navy. And they immediately said, of course, well, what happens in 3 days with the Italian Navy? They knew it had to be some kind of attack. So these 9 women went on this incredible, 2.5-day binge where they basically didn't sleep. They were hammering so hard at this code, and they cracked the entire Italian Navy battle plan. And that went right off to the admiral in the Mediterranean. And thanks to that information that they broke, the British won the Battle of Cape Matapan, which is the biggest battle in naval history, biggest victory since Trafalgar. And because of that, pretty much the Italian Navy was destroyed and never consequential in the Mediterranean again, which had huge consequences down the line for when the Allies were moving toward Africa, to take on Rommel. So these are some of the things, some of the people who are real people whose contributions were very much on my mind as part of the things to be dramatized for Bletchley Park and for the Rose Code.
No, their stories are fascinating, and I'm loving and glancing at some of the comments. People are volunteering themselves and what their skill sets would be useful for at Bletchley Park. So I'm sure we'll have
for you. I mean, it's pretty
absolutely.
much like if you had a pulse and you could keep your mouth shut, they would find something for you to do there. They had jobs for everything.
Exactly. Well, I wonder if you would answer some writing questions that have come up, if that sounds good to you. So Michelle asks, when do you decide what you want to write, and how do you decide the topic and time period?
There always has to be some sort of light bulb moment. I think for any writer, that's the case. And the light bulb is when you have that, thing that goes off in your head where it's a time period, it's an event, it's a person, it's a group of people. It's something that makes you think, I could hang a story on that. It has to fire you up. I have any number of things that fired me up. Then the question of, is this going to be the next thing that I write? Well, that's where I have to take some commercial considerations into account.
Yep.
And that's where, you do have to look and see, what is selling right now and what does my editor want to see? And, sometimes it means I'll have 3 ideas and I send 3 to my editor and she'll say, I'm really excited about this one here. And then at that point, I'd be like, all right, I can dig into that. I liked all 3 of them. For me, I don't think it is selling out to consider market considerations. You have to write what you love, but on the other hand, if you want to pay bills, you have to write what will sell.
Very
so
true.
For me, I tend to think of it as trying to find that Venn diagram sweet spot overlap between what is going to be, hopefully commercially popular, which can be hard to tell, and then what is something that I am fired up about, and see where's the overlap. And I find out what is going to fall in the middle there. But I have so many ideas about so many different things. I don't think I'm ever going to run out of things to write.
It's a good problem to have. Sort of adjacent to that, Anissa asks, if you were ever to genre hop, what genre would you hop to and why? Now, I know you've written in a few different time periods, but this would be maybe moving out of historical fiction. Is there something that you would love to explore?
Oh, that's a fun one. Goodness. I love a good romance, so I would probably write historical romance, which is adjacent to historical fiction. But I think maybe what I might be interested, I know what my husband would die for me to do would be sci-fi. He's a huge sci-fi fan. And I actually would be intrigued by that because I think sci-fi is sort of a sister genre to historical fiction. And that is because historical fiction looks at the problems of the present through the lens of the past. Sci-fi looks at the problems of the present through the lens of the future. But in both, you get a longer word count, which is good for me. I need a lot of words. And also in both, the world building and the research have to be there for the book to work. Mm-hmm. Probably for science fiction needs a lot more technical and sciencey, workups, research that I'm used to. So that would be the stumbling block for me. But I do love sci-fi myself, and I do think that there are a lot more similarities to historical fiction than might be on the outside. So maybe that would be something to dip a toe into at some point. Who knows?
It makes sense, the sense of world building and needing to give weight to something that you don't necessarily relate to in your everyday contemporary life. Makes a lot of sense, I think.
No, I think it's a fun genre, and it's something I always love. So, who knows?
Yeah. Well, long writing careers, who knows what twists and turns happen, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll probably be writing when I'm 90. So, who knows where I'll be by then.
Exactly. What about your writing routine? Do you have one? Has it changed in the last year? What is an average day looking like for you these days?
My average day usually is, I get up, I walk, I handle whatever emails absolutely need to be handled right away, and social media, ditto. I walk dogs, I go to the gym, and in the last year of lockdown, the gym was replaced by, I do workouts in front of YouTube or a DVD. And then after that, I eat lunch out of whatever I can microwave in 10 minutes out of the fridge. And then I write all afternoon. More of an afternoon writer. I write to a lot of different music. I need music when I'm working. For this particular, I like a lot of movie soundtracks and period music. So for this book, it was a lot of Vera Lynn and a lot of Glenn Miller. It was a lot of movie soundtracks like Darkest Hour and Dunkirk, Enigma. The Imitation Game soundtrack is great. So I had a lot of those sort of on repeat. And, I work all afternoon, and then pretty much I do the same thing the next day. And my life did not change very much in lockdown, except for the fact of, no longer being able to go to the gym and having to work out at home.
Right.
And that was, I think, a little tough on a lot of writers, is that if you were lucky enough to work from home, which I am, and I'm very grateful for, we are among the very privileged people whose lives did not have to change very much. And I do not have kids whose Zoom classrooms I was required to monitor. So I was even luckier in some senses in that my work was not affected. But at the same time, it was really hard in lockdown to focus. And so I did all the editing on the Rose Code during lockdown. And I have to say that was some of the toughest editing I've ever had to do, because when it feels like the world is on fire right outside your window, I'm sitting there thinking, I just don't care right now about deepening my heroine's emotional arc. I just don't care. Yet at the same time, I'm thinking, yes, but you will care when the book is out and that you didn't put in all the effort that you could have. So it's like, all right, get yourself in there, get it done.
Yeah.
So that was a little tough, but I know how incredibly privileged I was, not to have to be dealing with some things like, how do I work from home? I already work from home. So I try not to whine about that too much.
No, we all have moments of thinking, oh, this is a drag. I don't want to be doing this. But as you say, it's worth it in the end product when you feel really good about the book that you've produced.
Yeah. And that's what gets you through. And it's also the fact that you owe it to readers, who have been waiting for a book, and you owe it to them to make it the best you can be. And I knew I would be so ashamed of myself if I put something out there that was not the best that I could possibly make it. So that in the end was what, got me to the desk every day.
I know writers often get asked, what advice would you give to aspiring writers? But rather than ask that, I'm curious, what's the advice that you wish you had been given, or you wish you could retroactively give to yourself when you were a younger writer starting out, starting with writing books?
Oh goodness, that's a very good question. I think it would, what would it be? I think what it would probably be would be the advice my first agent ended up giving me, which was, or kind of giving in a general sense, which is that she said over the first lunch that we had together that 50% of new writers will sink themselves because they cannot or will not make the kind of changes that they need to make to their precious manuscript to get it publishable. And that really hit me in a good way, because it made me think, it made me give me that realization that, like, your own words are not sacred. And it is totally fine, when like we all have this idea that like there will be, the evil black hat publishing people who will like force you to, mutilate your manuscript and make it into something it's not. And it's true that like if somebody is trying to make your manuscript into something that it should never be, that's different. But if someone is telling you this book is 300,000 words and there is no way that is publishable length, that is a genre consideration. And if you need to make this, something, a business, something that will pay the bills and not just be, a wonderful hobby, you need to take that kind of advice into account, and you need to make it work. So it gave me the idea that it is not a bad thing. And in fact, it's essential to be able to think commercially about the business side of writing, even as you maintain this very pure enthusiasm and geek out for the history, for the words, for the writing itself. These things have to go hand in hand. Yes, it's a passion and it's, a calling to be a writer, it's something that you're, drawn to do, but at the same time, it is also a business, and you do need to think of it that way if you're going to make a career of it. If you don't want to make a career of it, if you just want to write the stories of your heart for you, you don't need to take any of that into consideration, and that's fine. I know some very happy writers who just write books and put them in drawers, and that's what makes them happy. But if you want to make a career of it, you are going to have to study the market. You're going to have to make changes that maybe you wish you didn't have to. You're going to have to learn to work within the confines of your genre or your deadline schedule, which is not always very forgiving. And
Yeah.
you're going to learn to do those things.
I'm so glad you bring that up because again, it goes with your sense of, we have to make sure that this idea is commercially minded and that it's actually viable because ultimately you want to sell books because you have dogs you have to feed and bills you have to pay. And
Yep.
presumably you also would like to have a life that you can support yourself. And I think there's a real concern sometimes with taking sort of the creativity out of writing. If you talk about the business side, it ruins the artistic side. And I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I really think that they can work in tandem. And I can tell you, for me personally, not stressing about money because I've met my deadline and I know when my advance is going to be paid or my royalty check is not going to be delayed or things like that. That's a really powerful thing not to have to worry about those things and not to have to feel that stress. So I think I wish that more people would talk about the practical and business side of writing as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely something I think about all the time. Whenever I think about a new project, whenever I think about something that is, I want to work on, but is it the right thing? And it's one of those things where I actually think it could make you more creative because if you're thinking something like, and this is something I sometimes tell people in, a class I did on writing dual timelines, because people ask why dual timelines, why several different timelines in a historical novel. And one of my things that I've said for as a propensity for writing it is that it can be a way to wrap a commercial ribbon around a topic that's a little more inaccessible. And the event, for example, if you have seen eyes glaze over when you say, I have this great novel about an 800 AD nun in Northumbria who lived in a cell for 40 years by herself, and you see those eyes glaze over. But it could then say, and this is all wrapped up with a modern day murder mystery about a skeleton found in Northumbria, which has ties to the French resistance in World War II, whatever that would be. But it's like suddenly maybe those eyes light up again. You want to write about the nun in Northumbria. It's a great story, but maybe it's just not as accessible as it should be. So can you find a creative way to package it, to wrap another story around it, to find some way to make it more accessible? And I think that actually can make you more creative because it makes you stretch your mind into directions that maybe ordinarily it might not stretch.
Well, and the beauty is when the commercial story makes the original story that you wanted to write even stronger. It draws elements of it out and it draws elements of character out. And then you really have a beautiful combination there.
Yeah, that's the ideal. It's like you want to add something that in the end will make a better book, maybe even better than the idea you originally had, which might have been simpler, but maybe wasn't going to sell on its own.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of being commercially minded, can I ask about what you're working on next, or is it too early to start talking about that project?
No, absolutely. I actually already finished the first draft of my next book, which
Congratulations.
I wrote it in this sort of blitz at the end of last year. I think it was because the election was going on, and then there was also the lockdowns and rising pandemic numbers worse than ever. I was so desperate to escape into anything that it's like I got a new book, and it's like the first draft came out, 100,000 words in 3.5 months, which is really wicked fast for me. And it was one of those things that I think I was so desperate to get out that it's like just diving into this wonderfully calm, soothing, spa-like environment that was the World War II Russian front just seemed so incredibly relaxing.
That seems relaxing.
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. I was like, oh, bullets flying all around me, tanks everywhere. This is great. This is preferable to what's on the news. So I ended up writing that rather quickly. It's going to be out March of next year. It is titled The Diamond Eye, and it is about a woman who was the most successful female sniper in history. She was a World War II era Russian woman who was a single mother, an aspiring historian, a grad student with the world's nerdiest dissertation. And all she wanted was, to graduate, finish, defend her dissertation and become a historian, but Hitler invaded Russia and put her on a different path. And she ended up not only becoming a lethally effective sniper with the nickname Lady Death, which is just the most incredible thing ever.
That is.
She got sent on a goodwill tour to America in 1942, where she just happens to, become BFFs with Eleanor Roosevelt. So it's like the first lady and a Russian sniper becoming friends. I can't believe this isn't a book already, but I'm so happy I get to write it. So
It's your book now. Yeah.
so that's the next book, The Diamond Eye, and it will be out March of 2022.
That sounds fantastic. What about books that you're reading right now or you've read recently? I know you said you're in release day or release month mode, so that can be a little tough on paying attention and focusing on things, if personal experience is anything to go by. But is there anything that you would recommend to readers who are curious about what you're reading at the moment?
Well, I have a couple of wonderful novels that just came out from friends of mine, and one I have not read yet. That's my friend Denny S. Bryce's Wild Women in the Blues, which is just the most incredible cover you've ever seen. It's this
It
wonderful
does.
woman.
She'll be on the show in 2 weeks.
Oh, wonderful! Then
Yes.
you get to see her. But I really recommend anybody go out and grab that. It's women living it up in the 1920s, and no apologies there. It's just wonderful. And then my other friend Stephanie Dre came out with The Women of Chateau Lafayette, which is this sensationally ambitious book which ties together three historical periods, three women, three wars, all focusing around one castle in France and one world-bending legacy that is involved with it. And so that's The Women of Chateau Lafayette by Stephanie Dre. And both of these are books I really recommend. I know the ladies and I love them, but I also love their work.
That's the best combination when you like the people and you like the work as well.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And best of luck with the Rose Code and everything that's coming up.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and watching. I hope you have a lovely day and a lovely coming weekend.
Yeah. Thank you so much, guys.